To Mr. Toby, his daughter was a curse, an abomination that should never have walked this earth. But years later, when his family fell apart and everything he loved was gone, he finally looked back on his actions and realized the child he rejected was the only one who truly loved him. Ada was a young woman living in a small, lively town of Benin where everyone knew one another. She was a beautiful tailor with a warm smile and kind heart. Her little wooden shop stood right in front of their house, and every morning, people would gather around as she worked, chatting and laughing while she sewed. Her husband, Toby, was a bus driver who worked very hard to take care of them. He drove people from their community to the town every day. His old yellow bus was noisy, but he loved it because it helped him feed his family. They didn't have much money, but they had peace, laughter, and love. Toby and Ada had been in love since their school days. When they finished school and learned their trades, they got married, even though they didn't have plenty of money. Their wedding was small and simple, just church members, neighbors, and a few friends. But it was filled with smiles and happiness. Everyone said, Toby and Ada are made for each other. Ada and Toby always dreamed of having 2 children, a girl first, then a boy. They would often sit outside at night, watching the stars as Toby held Ada's hand and said, "One day, our children will call me Papa and call you Mama." Ada would laugh softly, resting her head on his shoulder. 4 weeks after their wedding, Ada began to feel weak and sick every morning. She didn't understand what was happening at first. Then one afternoon, she bought a small pregnancy test from the chemist shop, and when she saw the result, she covered her mouth in shock. She was pregnant. That evening, when Toby came home tired and dusty from work, she ran to him and said excitedly, "Toby, I am pregnant." Toby stood still for a second, then shouted, "What? You mean you're carrying my baby?" He lifted her in his arms, spinning her around as tears of joy rolled down his face. "Thank you, Ada. Thank you, my wife," he shouted. From that day, everything changed. Toby refused to let Ada do any housework. He cooked, swept, washed clothes, and even fetched water. The neighbors laughed and teased him. "Toby, so now you're the wife," one man joked. But Toby would only smile and say, "Let them talk. My Ada is carrying our baby. She must rest." Other women in the compound were amazed. One asked Ada one day, "Ada, how did you get a husband who loves you like this?" Ada smiled shyly and replied, "It's just love and God's grace." Whenever it was time for antenatal visits, Toby never missed one. Even if he came back tired from driving, he would still follow Ada to the community hospital the next morning. The hospital was small and not well equipped, but that was the only one they could afford. The nurses there liked them because they were always together. One day, during a checkup, a nurse smiled and said, "Good news. You're having a baby girl." Ada clapped her hands in excitement. "A girl." Toby grinned from ear to ear. "We already have her name, Lillian." From that day, they started calling the baby by name. Ada was so excited that she bought tiny baby clothes and kept them neatly in a small box beside her bed. Sometimes at night, she would hold her stomach and whisper, "Lillian, my baby, you will be a blessing." Life wasn't always easy for them. Some days, they had only one square meal, but they always ate together happily. Toby would smile and say, "Even if we don't have food, we have love." And Ada would laugh softly and reply, "As long as we're together, I'm fine." Time passed quickly, and soon Ada's belly grew big. One cold, rainy night in her 9th month, Ada suddenly shouted from the bed, "Toby, Toby, I think it's time." Toby jumped up in fear. "Time for what?" Ada groaned, holding her stomach. "The baby is coming." He grabbed his keys, wrapped her with a wrapper, and rushed her into his bus. The rain poured heavily as he drove through the muddy road to the small hospital. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel. When they arrived, nurses quickly took Ada inside. Toby couldn't sit down. He walked up and down the corridor, praying with tears in his eyes. "God, please protect my wife. Please, let her live." After a while, the doctor came out and smiled. "Congratulations, your wife has given birth to a baby girl." Toby jumped and shouted, "Thank you, Jesus." He wanted to run inside, but the doctor's face changed. "What's wrong, doctor?" Toby asked quickly. The doctor sighed sadly. Your wife is very weak. We just found out there's another baby still inside her. We didn't see it before because our scan machine has not been functioning for months. We need to do a quick operation now. Toby's heart stopped. Another baby? Please, doctor, save my wife. I don't care about another baby. My wife is my life. The doctor rushed back inside. Toby knelt down in the corridor and began to cry. God, please, don't take Ada away from me. I can't live without her. The rain outside stopped. Time passed slowly. Then, after a long silence, the doctor came out again. This time, his face was full of sadness. Toby ran to him. Doctor, please tell me she's okay. The doctor looked down and whispered, I'm sorry. We lost her. Toby screamed loudly, shaking his head. No, no, please, do something. She can't die. But it was too late. Ada was gone. After a while, a nurse came out holding two tiny babies wrapped in cloths, one sleeping quietly, the other crying weakly. Your wife gave birth to two beautiful girls, she said softly. Toby stared at them. Tears rolled down his cheeks. Then he pointed to the crying baby and shouted, Take that one away. She's the reason my wife is gone. The nurse gasped. Sir, please don't say that. It's not her fault. But Toby turned away. I don't want to see her. She took my happiness. The nurse shook her head sadly. She's still your child. By morning, the hospital told him he must take both babies home. He refused at first, but they insisted. They are your daughters, the nurse said gently. Your wife would want you to love them. Finally, with trembling hands, Toby carried both babies. One was calm, Lillian, the one they had named together. The other was tiny and crying, the one he now blamed for Ada's death. He named her Elizabeth, but his heart was full of anger. That was the day love turned into pain. And that was the beginning of Toby's hatred for his second child. When the twins were still babies, Mr. Toby carried only Lillian in his arms and left Elizabeth crying on the bed. If both of them cried, he would rush to comfort Lillian and pretend not to hear Elizabeth's cries. As the years passed and they grew older, the difference between them became obvious to everyone around. Mr. Toby showed love only to Lillian. He never looked kindly at Elizabeth. At mealtimes, he gave Lillian the best food, rice with meat and stew, while Elizabeth got whatever was left. He dressed Lillian in bright, new clothes, while Elizabeth wore old, faded ones that no longer fit properly. People in the neighborhood soon noticed the way he treated his daughters. One man said to him one afternoon, Mr. Toby, this isn't right. It's not the child's fault that her mother died. But Mr. Toby shouted, Don't tell me that. If not for her, my wife would still be alive. She's the reason my Ada is gone. From that day, everyone pitied Elizabeth. Some women would quietly slip her food whenever they saw her sweeping the yard or helping to wash her sister's clothes. Elizabeth grew up quiet and gentle. She never talked back or complained. She always tried to make her father happy, but no matter what she did, he never smiled at her. Lillian, on the other hand, was his pride and joy. By the time they turned 14, Lillian was cheerful and always well-dressed, wearing bright gowns and neat shoes her father bought from the market. Elizabeth, meanwhile, remained in her old, worn-out clothes and carried herself with quiet dignity despite the pain in her heart. Every morning, before the sun came out, Elizabeth would wake up to sweep the whole compound, wash plates, fetch water, and cook before her sister even got out of bed. When she finished, she would sit quietly with her books to study. Elizabeth was very smart. She loved reading and always came first in her class. But Lillian didn't like books much. She preferred to watch television and play music with her friends. Sometimes, when Lillian didn't do her schoolwork, Mr. Toby would shout at Elizabeth, "Help your sister with her homework. Do you want her to fail?" Elizabeth would obey quietly, even when she was tired. She helped Lillian with all her schoolwork and never complained. Years passed, and soon they both finished secondary school. They were 18. Elizabeth dreamed of going to university. She wanted to study hard and become someone great, someone her late mother would be proud of. Lillian also wanted to go to university, but for her, it was just to enjoy life and have fun. When it was time to pay their school fees, Mr. Toby gathered them and said, "I can only afford to send one of you to the university. Lillian will go. Elizabeth will stay at home." Elizabeth's heart broke. She knelt down, crying and begging, "Daddy, please. I'll work hard. I'll make you proud. Please send me too." But Mr. Toby looked away. "I said no. I don't have money for you. You're not my blessing. You're my pain." Elizabeth cried all night. The next morning, she watched sadly as her sister packed her bags for school. Lillian smiled and hugged her. "Don't worry, Lizzie. When I graduate, I'll help you," she said softly. But Elizabeth could only nod, tears falling from her eyes. After Lillian left for the university, the house became quiet. Elizabeth stayed at home, cooking, cleaning, and washing clothes every day. She had no friends and no one to talk to. Food became her only comfort. Whenever she felt sad or lonely, she ate bread, rice, or gari to forget her pain. Slowly, she began to gain weight. Her once slim body became rounder, and she didn't even notice at first. But Mr. Toby noticed, and he mocked her every day. "Look at you," he would shout. "Fat and useless. You're just wasting space in my house. I wish your mother had survived instead of you." Those words always cut Elizabeth's heart like a knife. She would run into her small room, shut the door, and cry quietly on her bed until she fell asleep. Meanwhile, at the university, Lillian was living a very different life. She was not serious with her studies. Instead of reading, she went to parties and clubs with her rich friends. She wore expensive clothes, took pictures, and posted them on TikTok. Even when her grades dropped, Mr. Toby didn't scold her. He was just proud that his favorite daughter was in school. Years later, Lillian finished university, but her result was very poor, just a pass. Still, Mr. Toby threw a small party in the compound, inviting neighbors and saying proudly, "My daughter is now a graduate." Elizabeth helped him cook and serve food that day, even though she wasn't part of the celebration. She smiled for her sister but cried silently in her heart. A few months later, Lillian reconnected with a young, wealthy businessman named Felix, a man she had known briefly during her university days. He admired her beauty, her confidence, and the way she carried herself. Not long after they started talking again, Felix asked for her hand in marriage. When Felix and his family came to visit, Elizabeth was the one who served them drinks and food. She stood quietly, dressed in her old gown, while the visitors looked at her with surprise. Some of them even whispered, "Is that her sister? She looks like their maid." Mr. Toby didn't care. He shouted from the sitting room, "Elizabeth, go and bring more drinks. Be fast, don't embarrass us." Elizabeth obeyed quietly, her eyes filled with tears. Even though she was happy that her sister found love, she felt invisible in her own home. A few weeks later, Felix's family returned to finalize the wedding arrangements. The whole compound buzzed with excitement. Lillian's friends came around to help her choose fabrics and design her gown. Mr. Toby moved up and down proudly, telling everyone in the neighborhood that his daughter was marrying a rich businessman. Elizabeth watched quietly from a corner as they laughed and took pictures. No one asked for her help or opinion. She was invisible, even in her own home. Still, she smiled and whispered to herself, "Maybe this will bring peace to our family." As the wedding day drew closer, the house became busier. Visitors came in and out, tailors delivered clothes, and boxes of gifts filled the sitting room. Elizabeth helped with cooking, cleaning, and arranging chairs, yet no one thanked her. But 2 days before the wedding, Elizabeth realized something strange. No one had mentioned her outfit or told her what role she would play. Everyone seemed to be pretending she didn't exist. That evening, she gathered courage and walked up to her father. "Daddy," she said softly, "what will I wear for the wedding? I haven't seen my dress yet." Mr. Toby looked at her coldly. "Dress?" he said sharply. "You're not going anywhere. Stay home. You'll embarrass us with your dirty clothes." Elizabeth froze, her lips trembling. "Daddy, please, I just want to be there. She's my sister." But before she could finish, Lillian entered the room and interrupted. "Please don't come, Elizabeth," she said coldly. "My husband's family is rich. I don't want them to see you looking like this. Just stay at home." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. She begged softly, "At least let me watch from afar, even if it's from outside the gate." But they both ignored her. The morning of the wedding came. Music echoed across the street, and cars lined up in front of the house. Elizabeth stood by the window, watching as people clapped and took pictures. Then she saw her sister step into a shiny white car, wearing her wedding gown. Her vision blurred with tears. She pressed her palm against the window and whispered, "Goodbye, Lillian. I hope your life will be happy." Moments later, the convoy of cars drove away, leaving her behind. The compound became silent. Elizabeth sat on the floor of the empty sitting room, holding her late mother's old picture to her chest. Tears rolled down her face as she said softly, "Mama, I wish you were here. You're the only one who ever loved me." She stayed there until night came, crying alone in the dark. That day, something changed inside Elizabeth's heart. She promised herself that one day she would rise above her pain and make her mother proud. 3 months after Lillian's wedding, she called her father one afternoon. "Papa," she said happily, "I have good news. I'm pregnant." Mr. Toby's face lit up with joy. He stood up and shouted, "What? My daughter, you mean I'll soon be a grandfather? God, thank you." He danced around the sitting room, smiling proudly. But just when Elizabeth thought he would share that happiness with her too, he turned and mocked her again. "See your sister," he said, pointing at her. "She's married and already expecting a baby. And you, all you do is eat and get fat every day like someone with no purpose." Elizabeth didn't say a word. She just kept sweeping the compound slowly, pretending not to hear. But deep inside, her heart broke again. Every insult felt like a wound. Yet she still whispered quietly to herself, "One day, God will remember me too." Months passed, and soon Lillian gave birth to a baby boy. The news spread fast. Mr. Toby was overjoyed. "My daughter has given me a grandson," he shouted around the compound proudly. He even bought drinks for the neighbors to celebrate. 2 weeks later, things began to change in Lillian's house. She was home alone most of the time, struggling to care for her newborn. Felix went to work early and returned late, leaving her exhausted and sleepless. The baby cried often, and she hardly had time to rest. One evening, weak and overwhelmed, Lillian called her father. "Papa, please, I'm so tired," she said softly. "Taking care of my baby is not easy. Please send Elizabeth to help me. If Mama were alive, she would have been here to help." Mr. Toby nodded quickly. "You're right, my daughter. If not for that girl, your mother would still be alive. I'll send her to you tomorrow." The next morning, he called out loudly, "Elizabeth, come here." She came running from the backyard, wiping her wet hands on her dress. "Yes, Daddy." Mr. Toby looked at her with his usual cold eyes. "Pack your bags," he said. "You're going to help your sister take care of her baby. If your mother was alive, she would be doing it. But since you caused a death, you'll do the work instead." Elizabeth's heart skipped, but she nodded quietly. "Yes, Daddy." Even though his words hurt deeply, she felt a little happy inside. At least she was leaving the house, the pain, the shouting, and the insults. Maybe her sister's home would be different. Maybe she would finally be treated with love. That night, she packed her small bag with a few clothes and whispered to herself, "Maybe things will change for me this time." She was excited about finally leaving her father's house. The next day, the driver Mr. Toby hired took her to Lillian's house in Lagos. It was a big, beautiful home, painted white, with fine curtains and shiny floors. Elizabeth smiled softly when she entered. Lillian came out of the sitting room, carrying her baby. "Elizabeth, you're here," she said, but her face didn't look welcoming. "Listen," Lillian said sharply, "you'll be waking up by 4 a.m. every morning. Clean the whole house, wash the bathrooms, cook food, and make sure the baby's things are ready. Don't ever enter my bedroom. Do you understand?" Elizabeth nodded quietly. "Yes, I understand." "Good," Lillian said. "And remember, don't touch anything that's not yours." From that day, Elizabeth became more like a maid than a sister. She worked from morning till night, cleaning, washing, and cooking every day. When Lillian wanted to rest, she would call, "Elizabeth, come and take the baby." Elizabeth would carry the baby gently, rocking him to sleep while Lillian watched movies. At night, when everyone was asleep, Elizabeth stayed awake, taking care of the crying baby. Sometimes she would doze off on the chair with the baby in her arms. She did everything, yet no one thanked her. Lillian shouted at her almost every day. "Elizabeth, you didn't clean the floor well. Elizabeth, the food is too salty." Elizabeth would bow her head and say softly, "I'm sorry, Lillian." Days turned into weeks. Elizabeth worked without rest. But then, something worse began to happen. One afternoon, when Lillian went to the market, her husband Felix came home early. Elizabeth was in the parlor dusting the flower vase when she suddenly heard Felix behind her. He came too close and tried to touch her wrongly. Elizabeth jumped back quickly. "So, please don't do that," she said, her hands shaking. But Felix smiled wickedly. "Don't act like a child," he whispered. "I know your sister doesn't pay you. I'll start giving you money to take care of yourself, to buy anything you want." He stepped closer again, touching her cheek. "I just want us to enjoy each other's company," he said. Elizabeth stepped back again quickly. "No, sir. Please stop. I'll tell my sister." Felix's face changed. He frowned angrily and shouted, "Stupid girl. No one will believe you, not even your sister." Elizabeth was terrified. She ran into her small room and locked the door, shaking and crying. After that day, she became more careful. Whenever Felix was around, she stayed far away. She wanted to tell Lillian, but she was afraid. She knew Felix was right. Lillian wouldn't believe her. She would probably say, "You just want to destroy my marriage." So Elizabeth kept quiet and suffered in silence. 2 days later, while Felix and Lillian were sitting together in the living room, Felix laughed loudly and said, "My love, how can this fat thing be your sister? Are you sure there wasn't a mistake in the hospital?" Lillian laughed so hard that tears came out of her eyes. "I've thought about that too," she said. "Look at me, beautiful and perfect. And look at her, round like a ball. Anyway, she's only good for cleaning and cooking." Elizabeth was walking by when she heard their laughter and words. She stopped quietly and stood behind the door, listening. Her chest felt tight. Her eyes filled with tears. That night, she went back to her small room, lay on the bed, and cried until her pillow was wet. She whispered softly to herself, "Maybe they are right. Maybe I shouldn't even be alive. Maybe Mama should have lived instead of me." 1 week later, Lillian stood in front of the mirror, admiring herself with a smile. Her baby was asleep, and her husband, Felix, was getting ready for work. "Felix," she said suddenly, "I want to buy the new iPhone 17. Give me the money today." Felix looked at her, in surprise. "Lillian, the new iPhone? That's almost 4 million naira. Can't it wait a little?" Lillian frowned. "Wait? So you're saying you can't afford it?" Felix sighed tiredly. "Business hasn't been moving well these days. I'll get it for you soon, but please be patient." Lillian's face changed instantly. "You mean you don't have money for your wife? I can't believe this," she shouted, throwing her hairbrush on the bed. Before Felix could speak again, she stormed out of the room in anger. Felix stood there quietly for a moment, shaking his head. "God, please give me peace in this house," he whispered, then picked up his car keys and went to work. That night, after dinner, Felix and Lillian lay on the bed. Felix tried to hold her lovingly, but Lillian pushed him away. "Don't touch me," she said sharply. Felix looked confused. "What's wrong again?" Lillian folded her arms. "Until you buy me that new phone, don't even think of touching me." Felix sighed deeply and turned to the other side of the bed. He waited until Lillian fell asleep and began snoring softly. Then, a dark thought crossed his mind. He got up quietly, opened the door, and tiptoed down the hallway to Elizabeth's room. Elizabeth was already asleep on the small mattress beside the baby's crib. When Felix pushed the door open and entered, she woke up suddenly and saw him standing there. Her heart jumped. "Sir, what are you doing here?" she whispered in fear. Felix didn't answer. He came closer, his face dark and wicked. "Be quiet," he said in a low voice. "You know what I want." Elizabeth's eyes widened in shock. "Please, don't do this. I'm begging you." But he tried to grab her hand. This time, Elizabeth screamed with all her strength. "Help! Somebody help me!" Her loud scream woke Lillian instantly. She rushed out of her bedroom and ran straight into Elizabeth's room. "What's going on here?" she shouted. Felix quickly stepped back and said loudly, "It's your fat sister. She dragged me into her room while I was going to the kitchen for coffee. She tried to seduce me." Elizabeth's face went pale. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "That's not true," she cried. "He has been forcing himself on me for months. He comes home early just to touch me." I screamed because he came again tonight. But Lillian didn't believe her. Her eyes burned with anger. "You took my mother from me," she shouted, "and now you want to take my husband too? Look at you, fat, ugly, and useless. My husband can never want you. You're leaving my house tonight." Elizabeth fell to her knees, crying, "Please, Lillian, it's not true. Remember, I'm your only sister." But Lillian's eyes burned with anger. "You didn't remember I was your only sister when you tried to seduce my husband," she shouted bitterly. Then she turned to Felix and said coldly, "Throw her things out." Felix didn't hesitate. He picked up Elizabeth's small bag and tossed it outside the gate. Then Lillian shouted to the gateman, "Lock the gate. Let her stay out there." Elizabeth stood outside in the dark night, clutching her small bag. Tears rolled down her face as she struggled to believe that her own sister had thrown her out. Slowly, she began to walk down the quiet street. It was midnight. The road was empty, and dogs barked from far away. Her slippers were dusty, her eyes were red from crying. As she walked, a black Mercedes-Benz car slowed down beside her. The glass rolled down, and a man's gentle voice spoke. "Young lady, why are you walking alone at this hour? Are you lost?" Elizabeth stepped back, frightened. "Please, don't hurt me," she said softly, still crying. The man looked surprised. "Hurt you? No, no. Please don't be afraid." He opened the car door and stepped out. "My name is Nicholas," he said calmly. "What's your name?" "My name is Elizabeth," she said, wiping her tears. "My sister and her husband threw me out tonight. I have nowhere to go." Nicholas looked at her with pity. "Don't be scared, Elizabeth. I won't harm you. Please, get into the car. It's dangerous to stay on the road at this time." Elizabeth hesitated, looking up and down the lonely street. Then she nodded slowly and entered the car. As they drove through the quiet city, Nicholas spoke kindly to her. "You'll sleep at my house tonight. Tomorrow morning, you can decide where to go." When they arrived, Elizabeth couldn't believe her eyes. Nicholas's house was big and beautiful, shining lights, flowers by the gate, and two cars parked neatly outside. Inside, his two sisters, Priscilla and Anita, welcomed her warmly. They gave her food, dry clothes, and showed her a clean room. That night, for the first time in many years, Elizabeth lay down on a soft bed and slept peacefully, without fear, without insults, without tears. Little did she know that meeting Nicholas that night was the beginning of a miracle she never expected. Morning came slowly. Soft sunlight shone through the white curtains in Nicholas's house. For a moment, Elizabeth forgot where she was. The bed felt too soft, the air smelled too clean, and for the first time in many years, she wasn't woken by someone shouting her name. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and whispered, "So, this is how peace feels." Just then, a gentle knock came on her door. "Good morning," a soft voice said. It was Anita, Nicholas's younger sister. "Breakfast is ready. Come and eat." Elizabeth stood up quickly, feeling shy. "Oh, thank you, Ma," she said politely. When she entered the dining room, she saw Nicholas and his two sisters already seated. There were slices of bread, tea, and boiled eggs on the table. Elizabeth froze at the door, feeling out of place. Nicholas smiled warmly. "Come in, Elizabeth. You're our guest. Please, sit down and eat." Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out a chair. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. Throughout breakfast, Nicholas asked simple questions. "So, tell me, where are you from?" Elizabeth looked down at her cup. "From Benin community, sir." "Benin," Nicholas repeated softly. "That's quite far. So how did you end up here in Lagos?" Elizabeth sighed. Her eyes watered. "It's a long story," she said. Nicholas nodded gently. Then we have time, he replied. So she told him everything. How her mother died giving birth to her, how her father hated her for it, how her sister treated her like a slave, and how she was thrown out in the middle of the night. As she spoke, tears flowed freely down her cheeks. Anita covered her mouth in shock. "Oh my God," she whispered. Nicholas felt his heart tighten. He couldn't believe someone could live through so much pain and still speak so calmly. When she finished, there was silence for a while. Then Nicholas said softly, "Elizabeth, I'm so sorry for everything you've been through. No one deserves that kind of pain." Elizabeth wiped her eyes quickly. "Thank you, sir. I just didn't know where else to go. I thought I would die last night." Nicholas smiled gently. "You won't die. You'll live, and live well. As long as you're in my house, you'll be safe." For the first time, Elizabeth smiled a little. "Thank you, sir," she said in a shaky voice. Days turned into weeks. Elizabeth began to help around the house. She washed plates, cleaned the sitting room, and helped Anita in the kitchen. But unlike her sister's house, she wasn't shouted at or insulted. Instead, Nicholas and his sisters always said, "Thank you, Elizabeth." One afternoon, Anita walked into the sitting room and found Elizabeth helping Nicholas arrange his office files. She smiled secretly. She could see the way Nicholas looked at Elizabeth, with care and quiet admiration. Later that day, Anita teased her brother. "Nicholas," she said playfully, "you've been smiling a lot these days. Is it because of our new guest?" Nicholas laughed softly. "Stop that, Anita. She's just been through a lot. I only want her to heal and be happy." Anita nodded, smiling. She knew her brother wasn't telling the full truth. But deep inside, Nicholas couldn't deny it. He had started to admire Elizabeth, her humility, her calm spirit, and her strength despite her pain. She never complained, never demanded, never frowned. One evening, as the sun was setting, Nicholas stood by the balcony and saw Elizabeth watering the flowers quietly in the compound. She wore a simple gown, her hair tied neatly, her face calm. Something warm moved in his heart. He whispered softly to himself, "She's special. I can feel it." That night, when Elizabeth finished cleaning the kitchen, Nicholas called her softly. "Elizabeth," he said, "from tomorrow, you don't have to do all the house chores anymore. You're not a maid here. You're part of this family now." Elizabeth froze. Her eyes widened. "What did you say, so?" "I mean it," Nicholas said with a smile. "You've done enough. We'll hire a cleaner. I want you to rest, eat well, and think about your future." Elizabeth couldn't hold her tears. She knelt down quickly. "Thank you, sir. Thank you. No one has ever said something like that to me before." Nicholas helped her stand up gently. "Please, don't kneel. Just promise me one thing. You'll start believing that you deserve a good life." Elizabeth nodded, wiping her tears. "I promise." That night, when she went to bed, she cried again, but this time they were tears of gratitude, not pain. For the first time in her life, someone saw her as a human being. She looked at the ceiling and whispered softly, "Mama, I think God has finally remembered me." Days turned into weeks, and weeks quietly turned into months. Elizabeth was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived crying in the night. She now smiled more often. She laughed with Priscilla and Anita, and sometimes even joined them in the kitchen to cook jollof rice or make fufu. Nicholas noticed the change. He often sat in his office at home, pretending to read a file, but his eyes would drift toward her as she moved around the house, gentle, calm, and always ready to help. One Saturday morning, as they were having breakfast together, Nicholas asked, "Elizabeth, tell me something. Did you ever finish school?" Elizabeth looked down at her plate slowly. "No, sir," she said quietly. "After secondary school, my father said he couldn't afford my university fees. He paid only for my sister." Nicholas nodded thoughtfully. "And if you had the chance, what would you love to study?" Elizabeth smiled faintly. "Public administration, sir. I always wanted to work in an office one day. I like organizing things, keeping records, and helping people." Nicholas smiled. "You still can." Elizabeth looked confused. "So, I said you still can. Nicholas repeated. You're still young. It's never too late to go back to school. Her heart skipped. But who will pay for it? I don't have anyone. Nicholas smiled gently. You have me. Elizabeth froze, staring at him. Sir, you've done too much already. I can't. He interrupted softly. Please don't say that. Think of it as helping a younger sister. You deserve a better life. Tears filled Elizabeth's eyes again. Thank you, sir. I'll never forget this. Nicholas chuckled. Then it's settled. Tomorrow, we'll go to the university office and make inquiries. The next day, they drove together to a nearby private university. Elizabeth sat quietly beside him, looking out of the car window. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sitting at the back or hiding. She was sitting confidently, like someone who mattered. When they arrived, Nicholas helped her fill the forms and paid the registration fees immediately. The woman at the counter smiled and said, Congratulations, young lady. You're now a student. Elizabeth covered her mouth with her hands in shock. Thank you, Jesus, she whispered. Thank you. As they left the school gate, she turned to Nicholas and said softly, I don't know how to thank you, sir. Nicholas smiled. Just make me proud. From that day, Elizabeth started attending lectures. Nicholas's driver dropped her at school every morning and brought her back in the evening. Anita and Priscilla helped her with her assignments, and they often joked that she was now the baby of the house. Elizabeth worked hard. She studied late into the night and soon became one of the best students in her department. Her lecturers liked her for her humility and intelligence. One evening, when she came home with her test results, she ran to Nicholas's office excitedly. Sir, guess what? I got the highest grade in my latest test score. Nicholas looked up from his laptop and smiled proudly. You did? Yes, sir, she said, waving the paper. Nicholas stood up, clapped his hands, and said, That's my girl. You see? I told you, you were born to shine. Elizabeth laughed shyly. Thank you, sir. From that day, Nicholas saw her differently. He admired her focus, her gentle voice, her honesty, and her heart. He had helped many people in life, but none had touched his soul the way Elizabeth did. Sometimes, at night, he would walk past her study room and see her reading under the lamplight, tired, but determined. He would smile and whisper to himself, God, thank you for bringing her into my life. And deep inside, he began to realize something he had not felt in years. He was falling in love. 3 years passed quickly. Elizabeth had changed completely. Her skin now glowed, her smile was bright, and her confidence shone like light. She had finally become the woman everyone once thought she could never be, graceful, composed, and full of quiet strength. People in the neighborhood often whispered, She's such a polite young lady. Who would believe she once had nothing? Every morning, she left for school with a smile, and every evening, she came home laughing with Anita and Priscilla. Nicholas was proud of her. He often told his sisters, God truly brought Elizabeth to us for a reason. Elsewhere in Lagos, Lillian's once perfect life was falling apart. The police had just arrested her husband, Felix, for cybercrime. Lillian cried and begged as they took him away in handcuffs, but it was too late. The next day, a letter from the federal government arrived. It stated that all of Felix's assets had been frozen, his bank accounts, the house, and even his cars. Lillian was told to leave the house immediately. She sat on the floor, crying as she read the letter. God, what have I done to deserve this? She sobbed. With nowhere else to go, Lillian took her 4-year-old son and returned to her father's house. At first, things seemed manageable. They lived quietly, hoping life would get better. But as days turned into months, reality set in. Life there became hard. She barely had enough to feed or buy food for her son. Mr. Toby tried his best to provide for them, but age and hardship slowly wore him down. Each day, he grew weaker and poorer than before. Sometimes, he sat quietly in front of the house, staring into space, thinking of his late wife, Ada, and all the mistakes he had made. One evening, as the sun went down, Mr. Toby called Lillian to the sitting room. He looked tired but serious. Lillian, he said softly, I heard something today from a friend. He told me your sister, Elizabeth, is now living well in the city. He even gave me her address." Lillian looked at her father in disbelief. "You mean Elizabeth?" "Yes," he nodded. "She's doing fine. She's become successful. I want us to visit her and ask for forgiveness." Lillian's eyes filled with anger and pain. "You made me hate my only sister, Papa. You called her names, and I followed you. All because of what? Because Mama died? You turned me against my blood." Her voice shook as she continued. "If Mama were alive, she would be disappointed in you. You destroyed this family." Mr. Toby's face fell. Tears gathered in his eyes. He said in a low voice, "You're right, my daughter. I have had time to think. I was blinded by grief. I punished the wrong person. I miss my wife every day, and I know she would want me to make things right." He wiped his eyes slowly and said, "Tomorrow, I'll start gathering money for transport. In 2 days, we will go to the city to find Elizabeth. I want to kneel before her and beg for forgiveness." Lillian nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with tears. "Yes, Papa," she whispered. "We'll go." That night, after their talk, Mr. Toby and Lillian couldn't sleep. Both of them lay awake thinking about Elizabeth, the daughter and sister they had wronged. Somewhere deep inside, they felt both fear and hope. Would she even agree to see them again? Would she forgive them? Meanwhile, in the city, Elizabeth's heart was full of excitement. It was the eve of her convocation, a day she had dreamed about since childhood. Anita helped her iron her gown, while Priscilla decorated the sitting room with ribbons and balloons. The atmosphere in the house was warm and joyful. Nicholas stood by the doorway, smiling quietly as he watched them. He was proud of how far Elizabeth had come, from the girl who once cried in fear to the confident young woman she had become. The next morning came bright and peaceful. Soft light filtered through her window as she stood before the mirror, her convocation gown neatly pressed beside her. Her heart swelled with joy and gratitude. It was finally her day, Elizabeth's convocation day. She got dressed slowly, her smile radiant and her eyes bright with excitement. Nicholas, Anita, and Priscilla watched her proudly as she stepped out of her room, ready to attend the ceremony. At the university hall, Elizabeth sat with the other graduating students. When her name was called as the best graduating student in her faculty, everyone clapped loudly. Nicholas's heart swelled with pride. "That's my goal," he whispered, smiling. When she walked to the podium to give her speech, her voice was clear and steady. She spoke about faith, patience, and how pain can become strength if you don't give up. By the end of her speech, even some lecturers were in tears. That evening, Nicholas's family threw a small party at home. There was laughter, music, and happiness everywhere. Nicholas's business friends came too, congratulating her. Then, as the music played softly, Nicholas suddenly went down on one knee in front of everyone. Elizabeth gasped. "Nicholas, what are you doing?" He smiled and held out a small diamond ring. "Elizabeth," he said warmly, "you walked into my life when I least expected it and brought peace to my heart. Will you marry me?" The room went silent. Everyone watched. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth, smiling shyly. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Nicholas slipped the ring on her finger. Everyone clapped and cheered. Priscilla screamed with joy, and Anita wiped her eyes in excitement. Nicholas hugged Elizabeth tightly. It was the most beautiful moment of her life. The next morning, far away, Lillian and Mr. Toby boarded a bus to Lagos. They arrived at noon, tired and dusty. At Nicholas's house, the gateman opened the gate for them. Nicholas, who had just stepped out to take a phone call in the compound, turned in surprise when he saw two strangers standing by the entrance, a weary-looking man and a woman beside him. "Good afternoon," he greeted politely. "Can I help you?" Mr. Toby cleared his throat nervously. "Please, are you Mr. Nicholas?" "Yes, I am," Nicholas replied. He hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "My name is Toby, and this is my daughter, Lillian. We've come to see Elizabeth. She's my other daughter." Nicholas's eyes widened slightly. He stared at them for a moment, unsure what to say. "Oh, I see," he said softly. "Please, come in." He led them into the sitting room and offered them seats, then went inside to inform her. "Elizabeth," he said gently, "you have visitors." Elizabeth smiled, thinking her university friends had come to celebrate. But when she walked into the sitting room, her smile disappeared. Standing there were her twin sister and her father. Elizabeth froze. Her body shook. What are these people doing here?" she shouted. Nicholas quickly held her hand gently. "My love, please calm down," he said softly. "They came to ask for forgiveness." Lillian's eyes widened. "Elizabeth," she whispered. She could hardly recognize her sister. The once chubby, broken girl now looked graceful, confident, and beautiful, a woman who had found peace. Elizabeth's voice trembled. "Papa." "Lillian, why are you here?" Mr. Toby's face was red with shame. Tears rolled down his cheeks. "My daughter," he said weakly, "I was blinded by pain. I hurt you so much. Please forgive me. I know I don't deserve it, but please, forgive me." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to speak, but words failed her. Then Lillian slowly went down on her knees. "My only sister," she cried, "please forgive me. I treated you badly. I called you names and threw you out. I'm so sorry. I lost everything. Felix is in prison, and the government took all we had. Please forgive me." Everyone in the room went silent. Nicholas and his sisters stood quietly in a corner, watching the emotional scene. Elizabeth's voice shook as she finally spoke. "I forgave you both a long time ago," she said softly. "I just wanted peace." Mr. Toby sighed deeply in relief and whispered, "Thank you, my daughter. God bless you." Lillian, still on her knees, wept and held Elizabeth's legs tightly. Elizabeth knelt beside her and hugged her gently. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're still my sister. Everything will be fine." Both of them cried in each other's arms. Nicholas watched them quietly, his heart full. After some time, Lillian and Mr. Toby stood up quietly, ready to leave. Elizabeth walked them to the door in silence. As they stepped outside, she spoke softly, her voice trembling. "Dad, I've forgiven you, but please don't come back again. I'm not emotionally ready to see you yet." Mr. Toby lowered his head sadly. "I understand, my daughter," he said in a trembling voice. "I deserve it." He turned slowly and walked away, each step heavy with regret as tears rolled down his cheeks. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Nicholas found Elizabeth sitting quietly on the balcony, looking at the stars. He sat beside her. "You did a beautiful thing tonight," he said gently, "forgiving them after everything they did to you." Elizabeth smiled faintly. "She's still my sister, and he's still my father. I know what it feels like to have no one." Nicholas nodded slowly. "You have a good heart, Elizabeth. That's what makes you special." They both sat quietly, watching the stars twinkle above. The night was calm. The air was soft. And for the first time, peace truly filled Elizabeth's heart. The end. Moral lesson: no matter how much it hurts, forgiveness brings peace. Mr. Toby's hatred broke his home, but Elizabeth's forgiveness healed what anger destroyed. Never let pain blind you to love, because sometimes the person you reject today might be the only one to help you tomorrow. Thank you for watching this touching story. If it moved your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more emotional and life-changing stories. And tell us in the comments, what lesson did you learn from Elizabeth's story?